Welcome to part 7 of half bath to full bath conversion. In part 6, we finished up the electrical, so now we're going to continue on with the plumbing. And we want to make sure that the water is turned off. I've drained the water out by opening a faucet that's lower in the house than the valves I'm going to be working on. So I'm going to start with the cold side. My goal is to run the pipe over here to this side of the vent, and you can see the center of the vanities right here. So I'll start by cutting the cold side of where the vanity used to be, and I'll use my tubing cutter. Once I get my water line cut, I can start putting together the pieces. I want to clean them out. I got a wire brush hooked up to the drill, and then I'll use my tubing cleaner here for the outside. And then I'll use some flux to paint around the outside with a little acid brush that I use. And I can start to assemble this, and that's where it's going to go. So I'll mark that, and I'll drill a hole for my water line to go through. You can see it ends up right over, and I'm going to go behind the vent and come out right here for the cold side. So I've got it laid out where I want it to go. So the next thing I'm going to do is take it apart and lay it on the floor. I like to do a lot of my soldering on the floor or out away from the structure of the house. The 2x4s just makes it a little bit easier to do, and I can keep things lined up a lot easier this way. So I'll heat up my joints, heat up the fittings, and then I like to wipe down the solder joint afterwards. Gives it a little bit cleaner look if it gets wiped down afterwards. And I'm going to just go through and solder all the fittings that I've got laid out for my cold side for my vanity, and wipe it down. And then I can take the piece that I made and fit it in to its new location. You can see it fits right in, right where I wanted it to. So I've got a few more joints to solder, and these had to be done inside the wall, so I really can't do this outside the wall. So now I've got the cold side all soldered up. Let me wipe this down, get it cleaned up looking. Now I'm going to reuse the shutoffs. They were in good shape. A lot of times I'll replace those with a quarter-turn ball valve, but in order to reuse these, I have to cut the pipe to get the nut off of the old one, and I've got a new compression ring here. Slide that on after the nut, and then I can put my shutoff valve on and tighten it down. And then I'm going to cut the old drain out of the way, and I've got my ratcheting cutter here. I have to cut it in 2 spots to get it out from the wall stud here. Then I can go on to my hot side. Once I get this drain out of the way, I'll stuff this with some towel for now, just to keep the gases from coming up while I'm working on it. Don't have a cap right now. I'll have to get one of those and put it on there. So I'll cut the hot side, and then I'll clean it with my wire brush and get all my fittings together. And this is where it's going to run, so I got to mark that so I can drill it, and I'll drill a hole through the stud for my water line. And this is where it's going to go through on the other side, so I'll drill that as well. And that'll get me to my location, and I've got it all laid out here. So I got to clean a few more fittings and fit it all together. I have to do this one inside the wall, and I use a drill to clean out the inside fittings. I can show you how I made that. I'll add a link here for that. And then I gotta use some flux. I like to flux all of the fittings as I go. That way I don't forget any of them. And I'll fit my whole system together. I'm going to turn it down a little bit so that it comes out about the same height as the cold side. I could have come out a little bit higher, but it sure looks nicer when you have both of them at the same level coming out of the wall. And I put a little bit much flux on there, so I'm going to go through and wipe down some of the old flux. That'll keep the solder from running down the pipe as I solder it. Just keeps it a little bit cleaner. Now you can see I put a damp rag behind the fitting. That does two things. It keeps the joint next to the one I'm soldering on from loosening up, and it protects the wall. So now on this one it started to spin, so I'm going to put a piece of pipe that I had cut underneath to prop it up so that it doesn't spin while I'm soldering my joints, because I want to keep it nice and level coming out of the wall, just to make it look a little bit nicer. And then I'll solder all the remaining pieces, and I can then wipe down all my joints and inspect to make sure they're all good. And while that cools down, I'll remove the nut from the other shut off. And then I can slide the nut on, and I got a new compression ring. Then I can put my shut-off valve on and tighten it up. All right, I'm gonna move down to the toilet supply, and I'll cut that because it's going a couple feet over to the left of where I'm looking. So I'll cut this, and what I'm gonna do is just do a couple of 90s. I'll clean those out real quick, get everything all cleaned up, and then I can flux all my fittings. So this one's pretty easy layout. It's just a street 90 with another street 90, and it just does a 180 degree and comes around and sticks out of the wall with a small tail piece for my new shut off for the toilet. On this one again, I'm going to use a damp or wet rag to wrap around the fitting that's nearest to where I'm going to start soldering. That way it doesn't mess that fitting up. And I can go ahead and solder all the rest of my fittings, and I'll cool it down with the rag. Make sure everything is good. And we're good on the toilet. Now I can take my shut off. I'm going to reuse that again. Still good. Was just replaced. I'll take the nut off. Got a new compression ring I'll slide on there. And then I can replace the shut off and tighten it down. And the toilet's complete. Now we're going to look at the shower valve. So here's where I want my shower valve to be. And it needs to be set back in the wall because the black plate or the plaster guard here needs to be flush with the wall. So this is where I'm going to have to cut this 2x6, and that's the center line of my drain. So I want to keep the center of the valve as close as I can to that so that it's centered with the shower head and the drain. So I'm going to cut away a little notch out of the 2x6. I'm going to cut that depth just deep enough so that my valve will fit where I want it to sit depth-wise. And once I get that depth cut, I'll cut from both sides. I'll take a hammer and knock that notch out, and it should split along the grain here and give me a nice little pocket for my shower valve to fit into. So right there's my height that I'm looking for, and I'm going to run the cold side over, so I'll mark where that level line's going to be, and I'll just tee it off of pipe over here, and then my hot side's going to come in over here. So before I start soldering on the shower valve, I want to take it apart, and there's a little clip I take out here, and then I'll pull the actual cartridge out because that has a lot of plastics and rubber, and you don't want to heat that up. Set that off to the side, and that leaves me with just a brass shower valve body. This is the cartridge, and then I can start cleaning out the valve body with my wire brush on the drill. So I have all my water lines cut. Just need to clean up the ends. And then I'll use some paste flux in all of my fittings. Go around the inside and outside of each fitting. And I'll lay it out here on the floor and make sure everything fits together well. So that's my layout there. Get some of the extra flux off so that it gives me a nice clean joint. And I can solder this part up on the floor. I don't have to do this in the wall. If I did this in the wall, it'd be kind of tough because the stud is right up against this, so it doesn't hurt to do this on the floor. Clean that up a little bit. Little spot here, it needs a little bit more. There we go. It's a little bit better. So now I can put the valve in the wall, and I've got a clamp here, a pipe clamp that I'm gonna screw this in just to hold my valve in place. And I've got my hot side lined up and cut. And I also want to get all those fittings cleaned up and fluxed, and I'll have everything all together and ready to solder. I'll have to solder this one in the wall, which isn't a problem, but it is easier sometimes to do it outside of the wall. If possible, I'll do it outside. So I've already measured the length for my shower head. I like to go a little bit higher than normal. Most people complain that the shower heads are always too low, so I went up a little bit higher on this, and I'm going to cut a little section out of the wall here. That's where my shower head's going to extend out, and you guessed it, I'm going to use the oscillating tool. Just cut out a little notch here, and that's where it's going to peek through. I have to chisel out part of the 2x6 to make this fit in behind the drywall. So I just take out a little piece of 2x4, and I have to make my hole a little bit bigger here so that I can make the corner. And you can see I've got a good size hole, and it looks like my notch needs to be a little bit deeper for my drop ear to fit in. So I've got everything in place up top for the shower head. All I need to do is clean all my fittings and put those together. I'm going to use a angle on the top of the shower head just to get it to go over a little bit, and I'll solder the upper part before I put it in the wall. And then once I get that all soldered, I can clean out the shower valve, slide my pipe in, and you can see it fits right into the hole that I have cut out. Get it straightened away right where I want. Pull it over to the center, and then I can measure and make sure I get it close to where the shower valve and the drain is going to be. Then I can screw it into the stud, and I've got another piece that I'm going to put behind it just to block it up, and that'll give me another place to screw the drop ears into. Once I get this in there, I'll just screw it to the 2x6, and then that's my second mounting spot. I'll give it a nice solid shower head arm. Then I can go down to my valve, and I want to protect the fittings that I've already soldered, so I'm going to put the damp rag around those to keep the heat away from the ones that I've already soldered. And then I can continue soldering all the way around all the fittings that I've put together, cleaned, and fluxed. All right, once I get all of my fittings soldered, I can loosen up my clamp and slide my valve over as far to the right as I can. That'll get me right at center of the drain and keep me lined up with my shower head, and then I can tighten that down. Then for extra strength, I'll put another tubing clamp on the water line going up to the shower head. And now I have to hook up my T-fittings to the supply and run those over. So I'm going to cut like a 1-inch section or so out of the supply here and fit a T-fitting in. And I can do the same for the other side. Cut out a little 1-inch section, and that'll give me enough room to fit my T-fittings in. Now I have to cut my water lines to length to match up with the T-fitting. So I'll go around both of my supplies that are going to my shower valve, get those cut to length. Kind of tight on this one, and then I'll get all my pieces together and I'll clean all my pieces with my wire brushes. Clean these supplies. All my lines get cleaned with the wire brush. All right, I've got all my pieces cleaned up now. I can go through and run the flux around the outside of each piece and on the inside of each piece. Make sure I cover all the surfaces, all the fittings, and then I can start to assemble my pieces back together. Got them all cut to size. A little tight fit there, which is good. Put these pieces together. It should rotate around and connect to my supply line. Snap it into place here. All right, and that one's ready to go. Now all I have to do is fit the other one together, put the T-fitting in, and make sure that all my pieces have some paste flux on them as I put them together. Any of the extra flux needs to be wiped off just to give it a nice clean look once we're done. And then I can begin the soldering process. Just go through and hit each fitting. It goes pretty quick once you get started. That heat will roll from fitting to fitting. Makes it real quick and easy once you get started. Get that cleaned up. Gives it a nice finish again. And then I can go to the other line here. And I'll solder those as well. All right, got them all soldered. I can clean that up. Then I'll put my valve back in, get any of the dirt that's in there, make sure that's nice and clean. Don't want to leave any debris in there. And this is the way my valve's going to fit in, so I'll slide it in, put my retaining pin in the top, make sure it's in place, put the sleeve on, and then I've got this piece here I made. It's just a piece of 1/2 inch, and I've got a shark bite or a press-on connector here. So when I turn the water on, if it happens to be on upstairs, it's not going to be spraying out against the wall. So I can go upstairs to my shower and turn the valve on just to give it a little test. And it looks like it's working very well. So I'll put my cap back on, and we'll see you in part number 8. Make sure you hit that bell icon to see all the updates. I'm How To Bob. Thanks for watching.